My name is Lorraine, and at 57 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I had spent the last 30 years building my sanctuary, a beautiful Victorian home with rose gardens that bloomed every spring, and a cozy living room where I could curl up by the fireplace with a good book. After losing my husband 5 years ago, this house became more than just a place to live. It became my refuge, my peace, my carefully crafted haven. My daughter Sarah had married Jason 3 years prior, and I genuinely believed we had all found our rhythm as a family. I never imagined that one phone call would turn my sanctuary into a battlefield, testing every ounce of strength and wisdom I had gained through decades of life's challenges. Before I share what happened, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button if you have ever dealt with entitled in-laws, and do not forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will remind you that you are never too old to stand your ground. Now let me tell you how I handled the most audacious move anyone has ever pulled on me, and how sometimes the quiet ones pack the biggest punch. Walking through my home that Tuesday evening, I ran my fingers along the mahogany banister that my late husband David and I had carefully restored together. Every corner of this house told a story of love loss and resilience. The Victorian architecture, with its high ceilings and original hardwood floors, had been our dream project, something we had worked toward for 20 years before finally purchasing it. The guest room upstairs, painted in soft lavender with antique white furniture, had hosted my sister during her divorce, my elderly mother during her final months, and countless friends who needed a safe place to land during difficult times. My home office, tucked away in what used to be a small bedroom, was my personal retreat where I managed my freelance bookkeeping business and kept all the memories David and I had collected together. The transformation from a grieving widow to an independent woman had not been easy. Those first months after David passed were a blur of casseroles from neighbors and well-meaning advice about downsizing. But I refused to let grief shrink my world. Instead, I threw myself into my garden, learned to fix the leaky faucets David used to handle, and discovered that I actually enjoyed the quiet solitude of my evening routines. Sarah had been my anchor during those dark days, calling every evening and bringing groceries on weekends until I found my footing again. When Sarah met Jason at a marketing conference 4 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. He seemed charming, respectful, and most importantly, he made my daughter laugh in a way I had not heard since her teenage years. Jason worked for a mid-level marketing firm downtown, always dressed impeccably, and had a way of making everyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. During their courtship, he would bring me flowers from the farmer's market and listen patiently to my stories about the house renovations David and I had completed together. However, over the past 6 months, I had begun noticing subtle changes in Jason's behavior. During family dinners, he would make offhand comments about how much space I was wasting, living alone in such a large house. He would walk through my rooms with an appraising eye, suggesting that the formal dining room could be better utilized, or that my collection of David books was taking up too much space. When I mentioned wanting to repaint the kitchen, Jason immediately jumped in with advice about increasing property values and market appeal, as if I was preparing to sell. The most unsettling change was how he had started referring to my house as the family home when talking to Sarah, as if it belonged to all of us rather than being my personal sanctuary. Last month he had even brought up the topic of elderly care facilities during Sunday dinner, talking about how forward-thinking it was to plan for the future. I had brushed off these comments as a young man trying too hard to be helpful, but now I wondered if they were something more calculated. Jason's parents. Robert and Patricia lived in a modest retirement community in Tampa, Florida. I had met them twice during holiday visits, and they seemed like decent, hard-working people who had raised their son with good manners and traditional values. Robert had worked as a machinist for 40 years before retiring, while Patricia had been a part-time bookkeeper, not unlike myself. During their visits, I had enjoyed Patricia's stories about her garden and Robert tales from his workshop. They had always been gracious guests, bringing small gifts and helping with dishes after dinner. The idea that they might be struggling financially had never crossed my mind, and I certainly had no indication they were looking to relocate. That particular Tuesday evening had started like any other. I was in my garden, deadheading the late summer roses and watering the herb garden I had planted along the kitchen window. The September air carried that first hint of autumn coolness that made me think about pulling out my favorite sweaters and planning the annual bulb planting for next spring garden. My phone rang at exactly 7:15, just as I was winding up the garden hose, and I almost let it go to voicemail. Something about the timing felt intrusive, interrupting the peaceful rhythm of my evening routine. When I saw Jason's name on the caller ID, I felt a small flutter of concern. He and Sarah usually called together on Sunday afternoons for their weekly check-in. A Tuesday evening call was unusual, especially since Sarah had mentioned she would be traveling for work this week and might be hard to reach. I answered with a cheerful greeting, expecting perhaps news about a promotion or maybe plans for the upcoming holidays. "Mom Lorraine, I have some great news to share." Jason's voice carried a tone I had never heard before, confident to the point of being smug. There was something in his inflection that immediately put me on edge, as if he was delivering information rather than sharing news with someone he cared about. "My parents will be moving in tomorrow. They will take the guest room and your home office. I know this is short notice, but I figured you would understand that family has to stick together during tough times." The garden hose slipped from my hands, sending water cascading across my feet as his words registered. I stood there in my rose garden, surrounded by the beauty David and I had created together, trying to process what I had just heard. Moving in tomorrow. Taking over my guest room and office. No discussion. No request. No asking if this arrangement would work for me. The presumption was so breathtaking that I actually laughed a short disbelieving sound that seemed to echo in the evening air. "Jason, I think there might be some miscommunication here," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible while my mind raced to make sense of his words. "Are you asking if your parents can stay with me for a while? Because if they need help, we should definitely discuss how I might be able to support them. But I need to understand what exactly is happening and why this is the first I'm hearing about it." "There is no miscommunication, Mom Lorraine," he replied, and the way he said my name made my skin crawl. It was possessive, dismissive, as if my concerns were merely obstacles to be managed, rather than valid responses to his announcement. "My parents lost their lease, and they need a place to stay while they figure out their next move. It is just for a few months, maybe 6 at the most. I already told them they could have the guest room, and since you barely use that office anyway, they can set up their computer and stuff in there. Sarah agrees with me that this house is too big for one person anyway, and it will be good for you to have some company." The mention of Sarah agreeing with him hit me like a physical blow. My daughter, who had spent countless hours in this house growing up, who knew how much this space meant to me, who had seen me fight to maintain my independence after her father's death, had apparently signed off on this plan without even discussing it with me. The betrayal felt deeper than Jason's presumption, because it came from the person I trusted most in the world. "Jason, I need to speak with Sarah about this before any decisions are made," I said, gripping the phone tighter as anger began to replace shock. "This is my home, and while I care about your parents and want to help if they are in trouble, I cannot have people moving in without discussion or planning. There are practical considerations, financial arrangements to discuss, and honestly, I need to understand why this is being presented as a fait accompli rather than a request." His laugh was cold and calculating, nothing like the warm chuckle I remembered from family dinners. Mom Lorraine, I appreciate that change can be difficult at your age, but this is happening whether you like it or not. Sarah and I have discussed this thoroughly, and we both agree that it is time for you to start thinking about what is best for the whole family, not just yourself. The moving truck arrives at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I suggest you use tonight to mentally prepare yourself for having a full house again. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stood there in my garden, holding the phone and listening to the dial tone, while water from the forgotten hose continued to soak into the earth around my roses. The audacity of his words, the casual dismissal of my autonomy, and the complete lack of respect for my home and my feelings left me speechless. But beneath the shock and hurt, something else was beginning to build, a slow burning anger that felt both foreign and strangely empowering. Sleep was impossible that night. I found myself wandering through my house in the darkness, seeing it through new eyes, as I considered what Jason had planned for my space. The guest room, with its carefully chosen furniture and soft lighting, was supposed to become his parents' bedroom without any input from me about what that might entail. My office, where I had built my small business and kept my most treasured possessions, was apparently going to be commandeered for their computer setup and personal belongings. I tried calling Sarah's cell phone 6 times between midnight and 3 a.m., but each call went straight to voicemail. Her cheerful recorded message asking callers to leave their name and number and promising to call back soon began to feel like mockery. Had she really agreed to this plan? Was I so out of touch with my own daughter feelings that I had missed signs she thought I was being selfish by living alone in my house? The questions circled in my mind like vultures, picking at my confidence and making me doubt everything I thought I knew about my relationships. Around 4 a.m., I made coffee and sat in David's old chair in the living room, trying to piece together the puzzle of how we had arrived at this moment. Thinking back over the past few months, I began to see Jason's comments in a new light. His suggestions about downsizing, his interest in my property values, his casual remarks about elderly care. They had not been helpful advice from a caring son-in-law. They had been reconnaissance laying the groundwork for what he clearly saw as his inevitable takeover of my home and possibly my financial resources. The more I thought about his behavior, the more patterns emerged. Jason had started asking detailed questions about my monthly expenses and suggesting ways I could streamline my lifestyle. He had offered to help me organize my financial documents, claiming that Sarah was worried about me managing everything alone. Just last month, he had brought up the topic of power of attorney, suggesting that it would be smart planning for someone younger to have legal authority to help me with important decisions as I aged. Now I understood that none of this had been about helping me. Jason had been conducting a careful assessment of my vulnerabilities, testing my boundaries, and apparently planning to move his family into my home as the first step in a larger scheme. The realization that I had been so thoroughly deceived made me feel foolish and angry. But it also clarified something important about what I needed to do next. I was not going to run away from this confrontation, nor was I going to accept his dictates and hope things would work out. Instead, I was going to let Jason proceed with his plan, while I prepared something that would turn his moment of triumph into a lesson he would never forget. If he wanted to play games with my home and my family, he was about to discover that a woman who had survived loss, rebuilt her life, and maintained her independence for 5 years was not the pushover he had calculated me to be. By sunrise, I had made several important phone calls. My attorney, Margaret Sullivan, assured me that I had every legal right to deny entry to my home, and that any attempt by Jason to move people in without my consent would constitute trespassing. My dear friend Emma, who had recently retired from a successful real estate career, agreed to make some discreet inquiries about Jason's recent activities and financial situation. Most importantly, I called my bank to ensure that all my accounts were secure, and that no one had attempted to add themselves as authorized users or signatories. The day ahead was going to be challenging, but for the first time since that phone call, I felt calm and focused. Jason's confidence was about to become his downfall because he had made one crucial miscalculation. He had assumed that a 57-year-old widow would be too polite, too intimidated, or too confused to fight back effectively. He was about to learn that underestimating someone is often the first step towards spectacular failure. At exactly 10 a.m., I was dressed in my best navy blue dress, sitting in my kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee and my daily planner open on the table, as if this were any ordinary Thursday morning. The sound of a large truck rumbling down my quiet residential street announced the arrival of Jason's moving crew. And I watched through my window as the vehicle parked directly in front of my house, blocking half the street in a display of presumption that perfectly matched everything else about this situation. Jason emerged from his sedan, looking like a man who had already won a victory, his posture confident and his expression smug, as he directed the moving crew toward my front door. Behind him, Robert and Patricia climbed out of their car, looking significantly less comfortable, glancing around my neighborhood with expressions that seemed equal parts apologetic and confused. Patricia was carrying a small suitcase and looking toward my house with the uncertain smile of someone who was not entirely sure they were welcome, while Robert kept checking his watch and frowning at the moving truck, as if something about the timing bothered him. I opened my front door before anyone could ring the bell, greeting them with the same warm smile I had always used for family visits. "Good morning, everyone. What a surprise to see you all here so early in the day." My tone was genuinely pleasant, which seemed to catch Jason off guard for just a moment before his confidence reasserted itself. "Morning, Mom Lorraine," Jason said, stepping past me into my foyer without waiting for an invitation. "I hope you had time to prepare the rooms last night. The moving guys are on a tight schedule, so we need to get this done efficiently." He turned to address the crew without acknowledging that I had not actually invited anyone into my home or agreed to any room preparations. "Put their bedroom furniture in the guest room upstairs, first door on the right," he instructed the workers, pointing toward my staircase as if he owned the place. "And move that desk out of the office, second door on the left. We will need space for their computer setup and Patricia's sewing machine." The casual way he was rearranging my home, while I stood watching, made my blood pressure rise, but I maintained my calm exterior. Robert and Patricia approached me with genuine embarrassment, and Patricia immediately began apologizing. "Lorraine, I am so sorry about the short notice. Jason told us you had offered to help us out during our difficult time, and we are truly grateful for your generosity. We know this is an imposition, and we want you to know that we will do everything possible to stay out of your way and help with expenses." The sincerity in her voice and the obvious discomfort on Robert's face made it clear that they had been given a very different version of this story than what had actually happened. They genuinely believed I had offered to help them, and they were trying their best to be gracious guests in what they thought was a voluntary arrangement. This realization made me even angrier at Jason because he had manipulated his own parents just as thoroughly as he had tried to manipulate me. "Jason, I think we need to have a conversation before any furniture gets moved," I said, maintaining my pleasant tone while making it clear that I expected his attention. "Perhaps we should discuss the practical arrangements for this situation, including how long you anticipate this lasting and what financial contributions might be appropriate." Jason's face darkened at my words, and for the first time his confident facade cracked slightly. "Mom Lorraine, I thought we covered all this last night. My parents need help, and you have the space. I do not see what there is to discuss." He gestured toward the moving crew who were standing uncertainly in my hallway, waiting for direction. "These guys are getting paid by the hour, so let us not overthink this." "Actually, Jason, there is quite a lot to discuss," I replied, and something in my tone must have alerted Robert and Patricia that all was not as their son had represented it, because they began exchanging worried glances. "But you are right that we should not keep the moving crew waiting. Perhaps they should wait outside while we clarify a few things about this arrangement. The next few minutes revealed the true Jason, the man who had been hiding behind a facade of respectful concern for months. When I suggested that perhaps we should call Sarah to confirm the details of what had been discussed, Jason became visibly agitated. When I mentioned that I needed to understand the financial arrangements before people moved into my home, he became openly hostile. And when I calmly stated that I had not actually agreed to any of this and needed time to consider what level of help I could reasonably provide, Jason dropped all pretense of civility. "Listen, Mom Lorraine, I'm trying to be patient with you here, but this is happening whether you like it or not," he said, his voice rising to a level that made Patricia gasp, and Robert stepped forward protectively. "Sarah and I have decided that it is time for you to start thinking about other people instead of just yourself. This house is too big for one person, you are getting older, and might need help yourself soon, and family takes care of family. So stop being difficult and let these guys do their job." The transformation from charming son-in-law to entitled bully was so complete that even the moving crew looked uncomfortable. But Jason had just made a crucial mistake by revealing his true character in front of his parents, who were beginning to understand that they had been lied to about the nature of this arrangement. More importantly, he had just threatened and spoken disrespectfully to me in my own home, giving me all the justification I needed for what was about to happen next. At exactly 2:15 p.m., as Jason was directing the moving crew to rearrange furniture in what he had decided was now his parents' bedroom, Sarah's car pulled into my driveway with a screech of brakes that announced her state of mind before she even got out of the vehicle. My daughter emerged from her car, looking like she had driven straight through from her business trip without stopping to change clothes or process what she had learned, and the expression on her face was a mixture of fury and disbelief that I had not seen since her teenage years. "Jason Michael Patterson, what the hell do you think you are doing?" Sarah's voice carried across my front yard with enough force to stop the moving crew in their tracks and bring Jason hurrying down from upstairs. The use of his full name was a danger signal that anyone who knew my daughter would have recognized immediately. But Jason was too caught up in his sense of triumph to read the warning signs properly. "Sarah, honey, you are early," Jason said, attempting to regain his smooth demeanor as he approached her with arms outstretched for what I assumed was meant to be a reassuring hug. "I thought you were not coming back until Friday. I wanted to have everything settled before you got home so you would not have to worry about the logistics." Sarah stepped back from his attempted embrace with a look that could have frozen fire. "Do not touch me right now, Jason. I want to know exactly what made you think you had the right to move your parents into my mother house without asking her permission. And I want to know why you told me this was all arranged and approved when clearly it was not." The confrontation that followed revealed layers of deception that even I had not suspected. Sarah had indeed been out of town on business, staying in hotels with spotty cell service for meetings with a potential new client. When she had finally gotten my voicemail messages that morning, she had immediately tried to call Jason for clarification, only to discover that he had been lying to everyone involved about the nature and scope of this arrangement. "I told you my parents needed help, and you said family should stick together," Jason said, his voice taking on a defensive whine that made him sound like a child caught stealing cookies. "I thought you understood what that meant. Besides, your mom has all this space she is not using, and it is not like she cannot afford to help out family members who are struggling." "What I said was that we should figure out how to help your parents if they were having financial difficulties," Sarah replied, her voice rising with each word. "I said we should talk to my mother about what kind of assistance might be possible. I never said anything about moving them into her house, and I certainly never agreed to you making decisions about her home without consulting her." Robert had been growing increasingly uncomfortable throughout this exchange, and now he stepped forward with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 40 years managing workplace conflicts. Son, I think you need to explain to us exactly what conversations you had with whom, because your mother and I were told very different things about this arrangement than what we are hearing now. The truth that emerged was even worse than I had suspected. Jason had told his parents that I had specifically offered to let them stay with me during their financial difficulties, presenting it as my idea rather than his. He had told Sarah that his parents were in dire straits and needed immediate help, implying that they were about to be evicted from their Florida home. He had told me that Sarah fully supported the plan and that it was a done deal that just needed to be implemented. In reality, Robert and Patricia were financially stable retirees who owned their home outright and had been considering downsizing to a smaller place in a different part of Florida. They had mentioned this to Jason during a phone call, and he had somehow twisted their casual discussion about moving into a fictional crisis that required immediate rescue. More troubling, Sarah revealed that Jason had been asking her detailed questions about my financial situation, and the value of my property questions she had answered honestly because she trusted her husband's motives. Jason, I need you to explain to me right now why you have been asking about my mother will and her life insurance policies. Sarah said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level that I recognized as a precursor to volcanic anger. I need you to tell me why you have been researching power of attorney laws and elderly care options when my mother is perfectly healthy and completely capable of managing her own affairs. The silence that followed was deafening. Jason's face went through several color changes as he realized that his carefully constructed deception was collapsing around him, and that the various lies he had told different people were now being compared and found wanting. Patricia began to cry quietly, understanding that her son had used their trust and their love for him to manipulate multiple people in service of some scheme that apparently involved taking control of my home and possibly my finances. "This is all a misunderstanding," Jason finally said, but his voice lacked conviction, and his eyes were darting around like those of a trapped animal looking for an escape route. "I was just trying to help everyone. Mom Lorraine needs company. My parents needed a place to stay, and Sarah has been worried about her mother living alone. I thought I was solving multiple problems at once." "The only problem you have solved is showing all of us exactly who you really are," I said, speaking for the first time since Sarah's arrival. My voice was calm and clear, carrying the authority of someone who had finally seen through all the lies and manipulations. "But since you have made yourself so comfortable in my home, Jason, I think it is time you learned what that really means." What happened next was the result of the phone calls I had made during my sleepless night, and the quiet investigation Emma had conducted while Jason was busy moving furniture and intimidating moving crews. Sometimes the most devastating weapons are information and patience, and I had spent the morning gathering both in preparation for this moment. Emma, my dear friend who used to work in real estate, made some very interesting discoveries when I asked her to look into your recent activities, Jason. I began savoring the look of dawning panic that was spreading across his face. "It seems that you have been quite busy these past few months, making inquiries and arrangements that you forgot to mention to any of us." I walked to my kitchen counter and retrieved a folder that Emma had delivered an hour earlier, filled with printouts and documentation that told a very different story than the one Jason had been presenting to his family. For instance, I learned that you have not paid rent on your apartment in 3 months, and your landlord has been trying to reach you about eviction proceedings. I also discovered that you have been in contact with 5 different real estate agents, asking them to provide market assessments for this property. Sarah's face went white as the implications of this information sank in. "Jason, please tell me you have not been planning to sell my mother's house." I also learned some fascinating things about your parents' real financial situation. I continued, turning to Robert and Patricia with a sympathetic smile. "It turns out that you two are not facing eviction or financial ruin at all. In fact, you own your home in Florida, free and clear, have a healthy retirement account, and were simply considering a voluntary move to a different community. Jason has been lying to all of us about your circumstances to justify this elaborate scheme." Robert's face had turned red with anger and embarrassment. "Jason William Patterson, you look me in the eye and tell me you did not use your mother and me as pawns in some scheme to take advantage of this generous woman." The use of Jason's full middle name indicated that his father's patience had reached its absolute limit. But the most damning revelation was still to come. Emma investigation had uncovered email correspondence between Jason and a local elder law attorney inquiring about the process for obtaining guardianship over an elderly person whose competency might be questioned. The emails made it clear that Jason had been researching ways to gain legal control over my finances and property by having me declared mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. "Your husband has been systematically planning to take control of my home, my finances, and my life," I told Sarah, watching as the last of her loyalty to Jason crumbled in the face of undeniable evidence. The moving in of his parents was just the first step. Once he established residency here, he planned to begin documenting my supposed inability to live independently, building a case for guardianship that would give him legal authority over everything I own. The silence in my living room was broken only by Patricia, quiet sobbing, and the sound of the moving truck idling outside. Jason had gone completely pale, and sweat was beading on his forehead as he realized that his carefully planned manipulation had been not only discovered, but thoroughly documented. Sarah was staring at her husband as if she had never seen him before, which in many ways was probably true. "The police are on their way," I announced calmly, checking my watch, as if I was discussing dinner plans rather than the collapse of a criminal conspiracy. "I called them about an hour ago to report attempted fraud, elder abuse, and trespassing. Officer Martinez should be here any minute now, and I suspect Jason will have quite a bit of explaining to do about his recent activities." Sure enough, the sound of a patrol car pulling up outside confirmed that my timing had been perfect. Jason made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, turning to Sarah with pleading eyes and promising that everything could be explained, that this was all a misunderstanding, that he had only been trying to help everyone involved. But the evidence was overwhelming. His lies had been exposed, and his true character had been revealed to everyone who mattered. As Officer Martinez walked up my front steps, Jason realized that his moment of triumph had become the beginning of his complete downfall, and that the quiet widow he had planned to manipulate had just outmaneuvered him so thoroughly that he would spend years recovering from the consequences. The aftermath of that afternoon played out like a slow-motion disaster for Jason, but it brought unexpected healing and clarity for the rest of us. Robert and Patricia spent the next hour apologizing profusely, not just to me but to Sarah as well, taking responsibility for their failure to question their son's story more carefully. Their genuine remorse and obvious mortification at being used as instruments in Jason's scheme made it clear that they were victims rather than conspirators. "We raised him better than this," Robert said, his voice thick with shame and disappointment. "I do not know where we went wrong, or how he became someone who could lie to his own family and manipulate people who trusted him. Patricia and I are going to have to take a long, hard look at ourselves and figure out how we failed as parents." Sarah spent most of the afternoon crying, not just for the end of her marriage, but for the realization that she had been living with someone she did not really know at all. The Jason who had courted her with flowers and thoughtful gestures had been a carefully constructed facade designed to gain access to her family and the resources he believed he could eventually control. The man who had been exposed that day was calculating, manipulative, and willing to destroy multiple relationships in pursuit of financial gain. Jason himself was escorted from my property by Officer Martinez after being formally trespassed and warned that any future contact would result in arrest. His parents informed him that he was no longer welcome in their home either, and Sarah announced that she would be filing for divorce as soon as she could meet with an attorney. The moving truck that was supposed to bring furniture into my house ended up removing the few belongings Jason had managed to get inside before his world collapsed. In the months that followed, the full scope of Jason's financial difficulties became apparent. He had been living far beyond his means for years, using credit cards and personal loans to maintain a lifestyle that his income could not support. The apartment he was being evicted from was just the latest in a series of rental properties he had abandoned when he could no longer pay the rent. His plan to gain control of my assets had been born out of genuine desperation, but that did not excuse the calculated cruelty of his approach. Sarah moved back in with me temporarily while she sorted out the legal and emotional aftermath of her failed marriage. Having her back in the house was both comforting and healing, giving us both time to process what had happened and rebuild our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. We spent many evenings talking about the warning signs we had both missed and the ways that Jason had gradually isolated Sarah from her own instincts and judgment. Robert and Patricia, meanwhile, became unlikely friends and frequent visitors to my home. Their genuine grief over their son's actions and their determination to make amends in whatever way possible led to a warm friendship that neither of us had expected. Patricia and I discovered a shared love of gardening and spent many afternoons working together in my rose beds, while Robert helped me with some minor home repairs that David would have handled in the past. The most important outcome of the whole ordeal was not Jason's downfall, though that was certainly satisfying in its own way. What mattered most was the clarity it brought to my understanding of my own strength and the importance of trusting my instincts. For months, I had allowed Jason's subtle manipulations to make me question my judgment and doubt my ability to live independently. His failure to achieve his goals proved to me that I was far more capable and resilient than he had calculated. I learned that kindness should never be confused with weakness, and that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for someone is to refuse to enable their worst behavior. Jason had been allowed to manipulate and deceive people for years, probably because those who loved him had made excuses for his actions and hoped he would eventually change. By forcing him to face the consequences of his choices, we had given him the only chance he would ever have to become a better person. The experience also taught me the value of patience and strategic thinking when facing a threat. My first instinct had been to immediately confront Jason and demand that he reverse his plans, but taking time to gather information and build a case had been far more effective. Sometimes the best response to aggression is not immediate retaliation, but careful preparation and precise timing. I still keep that spare key in the same place where Jason found it, but now I know that trust is not about where you hide the key or how carefully you guard your possessions. Trust is about choosing the right people to let into your life and being wise enough to recognize when someone is trying to take advantage of your generosity. The people who truly deserve your trust will ask for it, honestly. Respect your boundaries and value your autonomy as much as they value your help. 6 months after that terrible Thursday, I can honestly say that my life is richer and more fulfilling than it was before Jason showed me who he really was. I have a deeper relationship with Sarah, built on complete honesty and mutual respect. I have new friendships with Robert and Patricia that bring joy and companionship to my daily routine. Most importantly, I have an unshakable confidence in my own judgment and my ability to protect what matters most to me. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be exactly what you needed to become the person you were always meant to be. Have you ever had someone try to take advantage of your kindness or manipulate you into giving them something they had not earned? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below, and please remember to hit that like button if this story reminded you of your own strength and resilience. Do not forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself and protecting what you have worked so hard to build. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that it is never too late to fight back against people who underestimate your wisdom and determination. Thank you so much for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that packs the most powerful punch. May you always have the courage to trust your instincts and the strength to protect your peace.